Okay, as in go? Sorry, 1 second.
Forktales, a podcast that feeds the food and beverage world.
Oh, awesome. Forktales is brought to you by Vigor, a branding and marketing agency for passion-driven, innovative restaurant, beverage, and hospitality brands. Learn more at vigorbranding.com. If you love what we're serving up, please give Forktales a 5-star review on your podcast service of choice. Think of it as a tip for good service. Hey everyone, today I have the honor of being joined by Mr. Bill Gardner. This is not our first chat. We've done this rodeo many times. He is the owner of Gardner Design out of Wichita, Kansas, and the founder of Logo Lounge. For those that don't know, Logo Lounge is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, repository of logo designs in the world. I want to say.
Great stuff.
Phil, how are you?
I'm good, and I'm glad to be out of the rodeo.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if there's a sequencing as to when this comes out, but we're actually recording this like 2 days before Thanksgiving.
That's right.
And,
so we're really thin right now. We're thin and svelte.
And I'm going to keep that way, damn it. I'm just going to keep all the turkey away from me. And I'm just, actually, the turkey's not what you worry about, is it?
Yeah. It's all the stuffing. It's the stuffing and the pies and all that stuff.
Yeah. But we are going to talk about food.
We are going to talk about food.
Huh?
We are going to talk about food. It's going to be good. And so the impetus behind this episode is over the last 18 months, there have been a lot of shifts in the visual identities of some very well-known brands.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if this is in chronological order, but we saw Pizza Hut shift their identity, McAllister's and Moe's. I kind of put them together because they're part of the same group.
Yep.
Burger King made a huge splash, and then most recently Papa John's.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is that?
I said their bun got
Their
bigger.
bun did get big. Yeah, less skewed and less ellipses.
You know what? You and I had just a previous email where we were kind of talking modestly about this, but there seems to be a lot of retro going on, isn't there?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that is the note. And so your thoughts. So just so the viewer or the listeners and viewers know.
Go ahead.
Pizza Hut and Burger King, I think specifically are the ones that they threw it back. So Pizza Hut sort of has their old typography that we grew up with, you and I.
Yeah.
They also added in their little chandeliers that used to be in their locations.
Okay. So here's what you don't know that makes this quintessential, this conversation. Pizza Hut started, the very first Pizza Hut was less than half a mile away from here. It started in Wichita by a couple of, actually fraternity brothers of mine, Frank and Dan Carney. Much older than I am. So Pizza Hut is ingrained in this community. And as those guys started it up, they started asking fraternity brothers, hey, would you like to open up a Pizza Hut? So a lot of the Pizza Hut franchisees around the world there's a lot of wealth in this community of Wichita based off of, you kind of go, he's a Pizza Hut franchisee. My wife's father was asked if he wanted to be one. He declined. So
of course,
his kids ride him just to no end about, they've got a saddle on his back about, Dad, do you remember when you were asked to be a Pizza Hut franchisee? And he didn't.
Yeah, may not go to Dad for financial advice. I don't know.
So this, I've worked for Pizza Hut over the years. I've, not in the store, but from a marketing perspective, branding perspective. So I know more about Pizza Hut than you want to even imagine, and I'm delighted that they went back.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, there was a lot of character, and so I think digging into. I think more of a high level here. it's still unfortunately happening in architecture, but back in the 70s and
Mm,
80s, and we could even say maybe the 90s, but definitely 70s and 80s, there was a lot of character in restaurant brands. I mean, Pizza
yeah.
Hut's typography is beautiful,
Oh,
that
it is.
original typography,
Yeah.
and that roof, the roof was iconic, and it seems
So,
like there was like this push to eliminate that
mhm.
in restaurants.
Yeah. And if you think about that, it's the old thing of the logo isn't what people remember about a Pizza Hut. It's the red roof.
Hmm.
People forget that the McDonald's Golden Arches were the original arches on the building. I mean, these things draw out of this language, this vernacular of the architecture, so often in a restaurant, and that's where the color comes from. That's where the pattern, the textures, and everything kind of draw out of. Associated with that same little story, there was an architect in Wichita who was actually hired and designed the original red roof. And
Mm,
as part of his deal, he said, "Why don't you just give me a couple of bucks every time you put up a pizza?"
I like that.
That
Yeah,
worked for him.
yeah, yeah,
He retired and did very, very well. And so that Pizza Red Roof became so iconic to the point that, when you first started looking at satellite photography of communities, you could go, they're Pizza, 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 Pizza. I mean, you
yeah.
could identify them just because of the red roof. There were no other red roofs.
Yeah.
And hanging on to that, I think it was, I'm guessing it was Landor that probably did that original Pizza Hut with the wonderful type and the likes that
Yeah.
they've gone back to or that they've retrofit into it. But yeah, I think that there's just been this regrasping of from the 70s, especially with Stranger Things, this typography that had this wonderful, fat, swervy, kind of fatness to it that
Yeah.
bold and spoke of food. And, people love that. And if you didn't live through it,
Right.
new to you, kind of,
Sure.
but you remember it in a retro way from what you've been told about it. So you remember the good, not the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And it's I love that typography. It's sort of like post Art Nouveau mixed
Mm.
with chunkiness, and it's just it's I rarely use this word when talking about design, but it's God, it's sexy. And we forgot that. It's almost as if Bauhaus did too good of a job,
Uh,
in
yeah,
neutering the beauty. And Stefan Sagmeister. So the restaurateurs that are listening may not know these names, but Stefan
yeah,
Sagmeister is a preeminent design thinker, leader.
sure,
Some
yeah,
people love him, some people have their negative thoughts about him, but he wrote a book about beauty.
yeah,
And I don't know if you had a chance to either hear him speak
yeah.
about it, but he's so right. And I think one of the things that really struck me about his talk was he did a quick poll of the audience, a question about which of these shapes are the prettiest and which are the ugliest. And so the prettiest shapes, there was of course division and yada yada. Was it a circle? Was it a triangle? But unanimously, everyone knew that the rectangle was the ugliest shape. And then he did
That's funny.
colors. Yeah, it's hysterical. So then he did colors. And of course, some division around red being the most beautiful, or blue, or yellow. But unanimously, brown was the ugliest color. And then he starts to show pictures of architecture that are all brown rectangles.
Isn't
And
that funny?
he's like, why then? If we agree that brown rectangles are the ugliest thing in the world, then why are we building them? And and so it was a great springboard. And I think that happened in the architecture of restaurants, but then it also sort of we brown rectangled logos
Yeah,
and
yeah.
design elements for so long. Um, is that why it's refreshing to see Burger King and Pizza Hut go back? Not because it's retro, but
Mm.
because it's beautiful again.
Yeah, and I don't know that some of those restaurants entirely abandoned the idea of keeping some color, equity and the likes. I mean, that was still there. I kind of going back to Stefan Sagmeister, who, by the way, is one of the most generous, just kindest individuals. If you ever have a chance to talk to him, he just really is a gem of an individual. But I think that part of what he concluded there is that familiarity is what we consider ugly. Because if you think about it, brown rectangles are what we are familiar with.
Mm.
And so I think that novelty of nuance, is what really, sparks our mind, because suddenly it breaks out of the snowblindness that we're accustomed to. And, especially with branding, how important is color when you start to think about branding? You mentioned Burger King, and I love, frankly, and it took me a little while to kind of figure this out, but what they had done with their new color palette that they've introduced and the likes. I don't know how many of your listeners, and this is odd because we're talking about logos that you and I both have committed to memory. And I know that, people are going to be looking these up to just kind of figure it out. But, Burger King, obviously with the burger stacked on king between a couple of buns. The bun has got a little bit oranger.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically have gone back to a logo that they used to have, except obviously there have been iterations of cleanup, and the bun keeps getting a little bit taller. So I'm forecasting that if you come to me right now, I can do their 2050 logo, because the bun's going to be just enormous on the thing. It just keeps getting bigger, but the type will be the same in there. But they picked up this color palette, which is based off of the different elements that are inside the Burger King family. So they've got brown and this. The bun has gotten a little bit more orangey, red, green for the lettuce, white for the onion, yellow for the mustard. And if you see the shirt collars on, the garments that they've made for the employees to wear, they've got this really sweet kind of 70s retro looking polo that's got these colors worked into the collar.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically the colors of ketchup, cheese, burger.
And lettuce, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Lettuce. And it's just beautiful. And the way that they've worked that into their materials. Now, I'm not speaking about how good the product is. I'm just talking about from a design perspective.
Yeah.
I love the fact that they've picked up that vernacular and are pushing that forward as a brand component.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think about. So my initial reaction was adoration for Burger King specifically. That look, I was like, God, that is beautiful. But then as I really process it more, so is it lazy? Like, it just, I mean, I know it was considered, and I know there was a lot of work put into it. So I don't mean lazy in the sense of the amount of thought and work, but it seems almost like a parlor trick to leverage nostalgia.
I've got some serious thought on that. And if only I remembered what it was. No, I'm kidding. Here's what we are noticing more and more from a brand perspective, from those visual entities, is that the logo was king, and the application, all the visual vocabulary that went with it, was kind of like the court that went with the king. Mm-hmm. So, you start
pun intended
about visual. Yeah, exactly. When you talk about a visual vocabulary, you're talking about the typography and the color and the pattern and the texture and the materials that are used with it, and all of these elements that kind of come together, the colors that come together to support that logo. And the logo was always at the top of the pyramid, if you will. I mean, that was the cap. And it still is to a degree, but I think that what we're finding is that smart branding is determining that really, since from a visual perspective, those things that we remember first are color, pattern, then we get down to the fine granular, imagery like you're going to find inside the logo. So the color and the pattern are becoming more important to brands. So you're finding the logo is laying back now, and that we identify a brand based off of color and pattern. So you're seeing some really wonderful renditions of what's being done. So when Burger King goes in and introduces this whole family of type and photography and color and all these elements in there, that really is what you're identifying Burger King by, as opposed to the logo when you look at their advertising. It's the same thing with Pizza Hut and what Pizza Hut's doing. And when they went to Simon Walker to come up with the new Pizza Hut font, if you will, that plays off of the original, or even if you go back to any of these other restaurants, you're going to find that more and more what they've really done, even Papa John's with their update, have kind of really relied more on the vocabulary and less on the logo as far as the identity goes. So
Yeah.
I think it's only smart from their perspective. It's not being lazy because they're taking advantage of equity that they have had over a period of time. But there's other thoughts on why they've gone back to a retro look.
Yeah, and of course we don't know the brief. We don't know
Exactly.
that stuff. So let's make that an asterisk
Yeah.
footnote.
Um,
Um,
and really, that should be part of the conversation that I opened up with, because anytime that designers engage in speculating about other work out there or taking pot shots or anything like that, being snarky, you've got to keep in mind that we weren't there. We didn't
yeah,
take the ride with them. We don't know the design brief. We don't know how badly they were, directed, or how well they were directed, or how much leverage they were given. So, everything that you hear from us today, take with a grain of salt, because we're speculating.
yeah, and then we're also we have the benefit of looking back.
Mm,
So it's easy to look at Burger King's previous logo, which was circular.
mm,
It was on that
mm.
sort of arched skew, and then it was
Yeah.
supported by that wonderful blue
Okay. So
ellipse.
I love Debbie Millman, and when she was at Sterling Brand, and they did that. That was the pony that she trot out every once in a while, as well, did the Burger King brand. And I'm going, really, is that what you really want to show people and say that was what I did? Because I never loved it. It was done in
Yeah,
the very late '90s. It had people were still trying to retire the swoosh, but it basically was, give me a big old orange bun with a swoosh around it and some type in it, and it never rung with me.
yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of wrong, this is one. I think
Yeah.
it's.
Mm.
Let's talk about Taco Bell. So,
Okay.
now, what I think what we
Mm.
like about the Burger King, the current rendition of the Burger King identity, is, like you said, that reclamation and reinforcement of colors that directly tie to the food itself, which seems very logical. But essentially, that's what Taco Bell started with. They had a very
Hmm.
quintessential.
Hmm.
Um, Color scheme of Mexico, or at least Tex-Mex colors, and it did align with the food. And
Yeah.
we'll make sure we have pictures of all this on the post,
Sure. Sure.
just so
Sure.
everyone can see it. But and then they ushered in this bright pink, purple, fluorescent yellow
Hmm.
Taco
Hmm.
Bellness, and now they've almost gone too far, in my opinion, to where
Yeah.
it's just a purple bell with a really
It's a purple
sanded
bell that
off.
reminds you of a prophylactic that hasn't been fully unrolled.
Yeah, yeah, it's
I'm
very like,
sorry.
I'm not. You
Yeah.
did do it, but
No.
and then the
No.
typography has
Well,
lost its character too.
you know, um, and probably appropriately so. Uh, that's one that I'm very doubtful is going to go too far back retro because of cultural appropriation. I
Sure,
think that there's probably, anytime you're dealing with what we refer to as a Mexican restaurant, you just got to tread very lightly
of course.
around the edges on that. But I think that where they have gone with that, is I have kind of a love hate for it.
Hmm.
In one way, I think, as identity designers, we're always told to take that mark and keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it until you pushed it too far, and
Yep.
then take a step back, because that's about where people are going to recognize and identify it. And I kind of felt with that mark that they had pushed it one step too far and forgotten to come back.
Yep.
And with it, I you've got to know that it was a bell to see that it's a bell, or read the name underneath it
Yep.
in there. And I can actually go back to when that palette that they worked with was much more colorful, and represented what was thought of as a Mexican theme, if you will. But man, yeah, I think they may have pushed it too far. But then again, keep in mind that their audience is a very young audience.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
It's different than other restaurants. So,
Yeah. But I think, just looking at it without the nuances, the iteration after the purple, pink, yellow
Mm-hmm.
I don't think was necessarily a bad move forward
I think it's
because it
just all purple
maintained.
now, right?
It's all purple, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think what's more notable to me is the typography has been completely
Mm-hmm.
sanded down to
Mm-hmm.
forgettable and unownable. It's lost its beauty, and that's
Blending.
disappointing. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a shame.
Yeah.
So another brand that's done that recently, which is part of our discussion, is Papa John's, and so they
Yeah.
just went through a
Yeah.
rebrand. I think there's been a lot of improvements, but I think there's some notable
Yeah.
question marks. I think they've dropped some shape, or you say pattern, shape, pattern, and
Mm-hmm.
color
Mm-hmm.
elements that I think were could have and should have been reinforced for that brand equity. Namely, they have shaved down the typography to a sans serif. They still have maintained the arches or
Mm-hmm.
the bending or bulging of the
Because
typography.
you're looking for a hump in your pizza. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. But then they lost the they lost the green outline,
Mm-hmm.
which I think was only negative because it had that horrible ribbon at the top that said pizza. Um, but the
Oh,
green outline was part, I think, of that identity. Just observing from, of
yeah.
course, our very high horse of snootiness.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on it? What are your hot takes on the Papa John's rebrand?
Well, one thing that they did was they do keep the green as part of the brand language once you get into their marketing materials. So
Hmm.
it still happens in there. Um, they have been backpedaling so hard since John Schnatter, the one of the John in Papa John's,
Yeah.
made a couple of unfortunate, kind of controversial comments back in 2018, and I kind of feel like they've been trying to build this distance between the old Papa John's and the new Papa John's. Obviously, he was a iconic part, and frankly, cost them the most money in pulling down signs that had his picture on it
Yeah.
in there. Is it Shaq that's now associated
Yep.
with? Yeah,
Well, he's also a big
so
owner, so that wasn't
yeah,
a
yeah,
stretch.
yeah. No, but at the same time, having him, become a spokesperson, for the brand,
Yeah.
ownership or not, um, kind of sequenced just the entirely different direction on this. Just coming to the logo, interestingly, they had, already dropped the slab serifs that used to be on Papa John's in the typography and gone to a sans serif version, still with
Hmm.
inside the green placard with the pizza on top.
Hmm.
So it wasn't a super stretch when they dropped that. But the biggest thing to me is that they dropped the apostrophe, which is always a bitch. Is Papa John's? Are we saying it's his, or are we saying Papa John's has in many of these? And
Right.
there's 5,500 units around the world of these units, so we might just be talking in plurality here. But
Absolutely.
getting rid of always trying to shove that apostrophe into a name, it's one of those foregone conclusions that eventually you're going to dump it. That people are going to
Yeah.
forgive you on that. But
Yeah. Do you
yeah,
think
what's
Josh
interesting?
is mad about
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
apostrophe? Do you think he's like pissed? He's like,
Yeah,
they took the
this is my
possessive.
apostrophe. It was mine. Yeah, well, it ain't. It's no longer yours. The interesting thing to me was that they also did a stacked version of the Papa John's logo.
Yeah.
So they've got the entire hump on top of Papa and John's underneath. But it gives them the option of having either a horizontal or a squared solution, which is important to designers somewhat. But I think it was frankly kind of a stupid move doing the stacked version. They're not using it much, so we'll see what ends up happening with that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see how they have employed it when they announced the rebrand, and
Mhm.
where they're showing it. And when I see, so I think when you see it on the box, I don't have much of a plus minus reaction.
Mhm.
When I see it plopped on a poster, it's white and it's just hanging. It just feels like this floating thing.
Do you mean the
It's
square version or the
the
horizontal
stacked
version?
the
Yeah,
stacked where it's
yeah,
Papa on top, John's on the bottom, and I
yeah.
think I specifically see it in some of the posters that exist inside the prototype interiors, and that's where my head kind of tilted to the side with a little bit of a mm, that doesn't really do
Yeah.
much for me. Like
I'm not sure they
not that
needed
I'm
to do
the
that.
target market, but
It's kind of like McDonald's.
Yeah, especially not when you're
I
inside
think
the
I'm going to
location.
do Mick and Donald's,
Yeah.
underneath it. It's just kind of like, no, it's Papa John's. You've already gotten rid of your apostrophe. You've already shortened yourself by at least 5%. So be happy.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I think what they did is good. And again, it comes back to the visual language that holds this thing together, the brand language. Because if you get into that, that's where you start to see the green comes back into play again.
Hmm.
They've got some strong typography, some strong photographic solutions that work in there. I think they've interestingly taken all the colors and associated them with parts of their products like tangy tomato red or frosty white or just things that kind of
Yeah.
come back to the ingredients on their pizzas. So anyway,
Well, so let's talk about those ingredients. So they
yeah,
also did something that I definitely laughed at with Subway, and I did
yeah.
it in press because why hold punches?
Ah,
But so they labeled ingredients, and I get the
ah,
thinking. It's like we're better ingredients, better pizza, so let's label the ingredient on this poster. But it's mozzarella.
yeah.
It's tomatoes. It's pepperoni. It's like, you don't even need to label them. I see them. That's pepperoni. We know what pepperoni looks like. It'd be different if it were like calabrese pepperoni or buffalo mozzarella, like, or something that was actually notable, worth labeling.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
to me, it seems silly. And
yeah.
Sub. In case you didn't know, Subway did this too. They had all the bins of their produce, but whereas like a sweet green would be like butter lettuce and
Oh, I love. Well, I
Jerusalem
wish I had butter lettuce.
artichokes.
I may start eating lettuce if it's got butter in it.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So you kind of go back to what Domino's tried to do, to some degree with improving their ingredients and when they went through their entire trials. But I think that they came up with names that were a little bit more embellished and had a little bit more literary license to them.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, frankly, okay, it's a burger and it's mustard, it's tomato and it's pepperoni, and we know what the ingredients are. So I
yeah.
think if anything, they're pressing the idea that it's fresh, and
Right.
those visuals should probably for whatever kind of price point they ended up photographing the tomatoes and the basil and everything with, they look fresh.
Right. Yeah, and I think the thing to me though is so the statement is better ingredients, better pizza. Their advertising now is all typography. They're not showing product.
Mm-hmm.
And dude, I'll go to fisticuffs on this. You got to show the product. I don't care what anyone
Mm-hmm.
says. And I love Charlie Hopper. He wrote a whole book called Selling Eating. It's a brilliant book, but you got to show the product.
Yeah.
It works. And I don't care that a sizzling steak looks like a sizzling steak. It's anyway. So they have all typography, and they're really leaning into the simplicity of ingredients. It's 6 ingredients that make our pizza, and that's great. However, if you're going to say better ingredients,
Mm.
I still have questions. Namely,
Yeah.
why is it better? How is it better? And
Yeah.
and showing me a
And
picture
wasn't
of
it wasn't it good enough last year when I bought pizza from you guys?
yeah,
Yeah.
what has shifted? Like now with 100% less racism.
I
Like
And that, well, let's be frank. I mean, they're just glad to not be talking about that right now. So
yeah,
anything that they talk about, as long as that's not the focal point of it, they're feeling good. Yeah, when you
yeah,
say something like better ingredients, it does. It raises a specter of, so it wasn't very good before. Is that what you're saying? But now it's better. And Domino's could get away with that because they did have a crap pizza and they did get it better.
and they owned it.
But yeah, and they owned it. But this is kind of like kind of a halfway commitment to the challenge. So I'm from Kansas, and our state song is "Home on the Range." And
Hmm.
there's a line in it that I've always loved, which is where the skies are not cloudy all day. And I'm going, is that the best you can say about Kansas? The skies aren't cloudy. I mean, most of the day it's cloudy, but but they aren't cloudy all day. It's kind of like the ingredients are better.
Yeah,
Well, better than what? And
yeah.
does better mean they're great? Or does it just mean they're better? They got 10% better, but they were at 2%, so now they're 12%. You know,
Right. Well, and it's a tough claim to make that and to make it believable.
Mm.
I guess when you look at who the direct competitors are, the direct competitors are going to be Pizza Hut, Domino's, Marco's is making a strong stand.
Mhm.
I'm sure I'm missing a few, but it's essentially the pizza delivered as a full meal for multiple people.
Yeah,
So they're not necessarily up against Blaze Pizza or Mod Pizza just because they're
yeah,
selling
yeah,
pizza.
yeah,
However, when you look comparatively, sorry, dude, both of those brands, Blaze and Mod, have much better ingredients than yours,
yeah,
and they can talk about them, and they have more variety, and it's interesting. So I think the better ingredients, better pizza thing, I think they might be shedding it in exchange for simple, and simple means better because we're not adding so much to this to where
yeah.
it becomes not cleaner eating. I don't know. It's very perplexing to me. Um, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I
I've
think
got, when we talk about pizza, I'm just realizing that, and I'll be frank because, Pizza Hut's from here in Wichita. Um, my wife still has her preferred pizza, which is from a local chain that is much better and we pay more money for and the likes. I'm still good with a $9 pizza from Pizza Hut. I'm
yeah.
still good there. But there's that world of difference. Everybody that we're talking about chain wise, none of them are reaching that high end market.
Hmm.
People that want to go out for pizza aren't really showing up at Pizza Hut unless you've got a whole chain gang full of little league teams behind you. I mean,
Right.
you're going out to a nicer pizza restaurant, or you're going out to a restaurant that happens to have pizza, but they've got a wood burning pizza oven or whatever. You're
Right.
you're going out for a better meal. So all of these are saying we're making better pizza. Yeah, okay, but we're still pricing it out at $15 or under, or $10 or under, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's a different world, two
Yeah.
different places.
I see. So, being honest about Papa John's, I think that they have the same issue as Reese and Taco Bell. I think they worked it just a little bit too much with the typography for their core logo.
Hmm.
I do see a world where they may step back just a little bit and put those serifs back on, which I think made it truly unique. I don't think the hump is unique enough, especially
Yeah,
when you don't have the emblem. But like you said, they've definitely had some pretty big fish to fry over the last year and a half with that fallout.
yeah.
So I think the big question here is when you're coming up to change something with a
Hmm.
brand of these sizes,
Hmm.
how do you start to make the choice to either evolve or rebrand? And so for those that are listening, I would
Hmm.
consider, by all means, disagree if you want. I would consider Papa John's and Taco Bell, for instance, brand evolutions. They
Hmm.
didn't throw it all away and start over. They went forward. Whereas Burger King, I see as
Or de evolutions, by the way.
so maybe Burger King's more of a de-evolution where they went
Yeah,
back and then iterated on something that maybe had
sure.
more equity. How do you start to make that decision? How do you start
You
to
know,
decide what's right?
uh, dollars and franchisees. Um, I'm being
Yeah,
dead serious here.
yeah.
Uh, and this is the thing that people have to keep in mind is that all these, brands that we're talking about right now, many of them are franchised units. You've got franchisees that have to foot the bill when you change a sign, when you change all the environmental graphics, when, things change dramatically, somebody's got to pay for that.
Hmm.
And even if they are corporate owned, uh, this is a massive undertaking, to do something like this. It's not just a simple thing. And what evolution does is it keeps you from veering so dramatically on a brand that if the attrition that typically happens in a brand moving forward doesn't happen on day one, people are forgiving
Hmm.
because both these brands are in play. Yeah, I'm familiar with this brand and that, so it's not this dramatic thing where you're going, gosh, the Taco Bell on that side of town still has the pink and gold and purple in their logo, and the one on that side is just white and purple.
Right.
We're not as concerned about the one on that side still has the old logo, and this one over here doesn't have a bell anymore because they decided to change it into a candle or something else.
Right.
It's so there's a lot of thought that has to go into what's the cost of this going to be. How does the public respond to this? but how does the ownership respond to this?
Right.
How much does it cost us to actually get into this? And that's why so many times, I mean, keep in mind that most rebranding that happens, the public is very unaware of. It's, it is subtle. We're going to shift the obliqueness of an italic, or we're going to change a color, very imperceptibly, or we're going to change the text font that we've been working in conjunction. So there are changes that are continually, evolving with brands. It's not always a matter of, let's pull off that logo and put this new logo on. So when you do go through that, if it is evolutionary, so, not imperceptibly, but, just slightly, it works better for the public and it works better for the ownership.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, especially at brands that size, I mean, you could still find Taco Bells that have the original look.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So these brands exist with a lot of confusion in certain instances.
It's true. Yeah.
But notably, I would say one brand that has done just a fantastic job of evolving is the brand that you're holding in your hand right now, Starbucks.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. No. And I mean, it is a Christmas cup. Keep that in mind. Yeah.
Yes, which is great because they do that every year.
Yeah. Now, I love that brand. The really sad news is that this was, in fact, Starbucks, a Americano with some cinnamon on top at 6 o'clock this morning when I showed up at work, which is my typical hours. But by 8 o'clock, I had brewed my own back there with Local Roasters, which is a client of ours, and I had poured it in. So I've moved on, but the cup is still there.
Hey, if there's Local Roasters,
brand,
if the Local Roasters can release cups every year, I'm sure they wouldn't be local anymore.
Yeah,
because that's a huge undertaking, especially in this day and age. But So I mean, on brand evolutions and all that stuff, I actually unpack it a bit more in my book, shameless plug, the Bullhearted Brand. And so it's an interesting, very surgical approach. And I think even though I did have some criticisms today, all the respect in the world to Jones Knowles Ritchie, who did the Burger King rebrand, and the agencies that you've mentioned as well. It is not as simple as making something in Illustrator. And I think a lot of designers, creatives, and even leaders think it is. There is a lot of, you kind of alluded to it and said it, like there's a lot of garnering support within the organization and within that next layer, which is the franchisee groups. You got to get people on board. You got to get people excited. And otherwise it will fall flat. And there's no amount of beautiful design in the world that's going to fix that. And I think that's why we also had to make that little asterisk footnote at, hey, we don't know the brief. We don't know the challenge. And so take that for what it's worth. And any final thoughts, Bill?
I loved a comment from Tom Geismer, Trimhoff Geismer, made about branding, which was that nothing dulls as quickly as the cutting edge. And when you tend to think about those restaurants or those entities that go out, dramatically changing something because it's what's in right now. It usually is the identity that wears out the quickest. It's going to be gone in a short period of time. And, the other thought is that in design, that design hates a void. So when something gets abandoned broadly, somebody else is going to notice that that's been abandoned and they're going to fill that void. They're going to come over design wise. So when everybody started shifting over to fonts that were minus their serifs and kind of the blanding of America, the blanding of the world, people started saying, hey, look at these serif fonts. These things are kind of sexy. These things are kind of fat and luscious, and I don't want to work with those. So, it's a pendulum. It swings. That always works.
Yeah, it's a I think that is essentially the Burger King story, put simply, right? In that logo.
If you love what we served up, please follow us at Vigor Branding on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Medium. Forktales is produced by the team at Vigor. Audio and video post-productions provided by Zencaster. Music performed by Jet Trash and licensed through musicbed.com. Joseph handles his own hair, makeup, and stunts. Copyright 2003 to 2021, Vigor Graphic Design LLC, all rights reserved.